Welcome in, everyone, to the latest edition of G-Rated, where we review the latest movies and TV shows. I'm Gerald Bourget, joined by my PHNX Sons co-host, Saul.
Let's go.
And today we are talking Shrinking, and I think I can speak for both Saul and I when I say this is one of my new favorite shows, just in terms of week-to-week happiness and joy that it provides.
Man, I don't know if besides Ted Lasso, this is the only other show in my lifetime where I have been desperate for the next episode immediately after the last episode. It was just such a fantastic show.
It is, and it's I think it's by similar writers of Ted Lasso, or someone who was involved with Ted Lasso is also involved with this show. So you can definitely feel the similarities there in the way that it's so lighthearted and uplifting, but at times it'll hit you right in the feels.
Oh yeah. There's some dark moments. I mean, listen. I mean, they're a bunch of therapists trying to figure out life.
Yeah.
In the middle of tragedy and a personal conflict, and that's the levels to this that I just appreciate so much. And to make, listen, what's his name? Jason Segel. I always want to say Sudeikis because again,
right.
Ted Lasso. Jason Segel losing his wife, and then all these other things, dealing with his daughter, and then counseling his patients to get the most out of life by telling them to do borderline risky things, which the cliffhanger at the end,
right? Literal cliffhanger.
It's awesome. It's just so awesome. Great writing on this show for sure.
It is, and in terms of plot development, there's not a ton going on, but it's such a good show because it rests on the character relationships and just those dynamics there. But let's talk a little bit about the finale. You mentioned it, the cliffhanger there. Your thoughts on it? Because for me, my one concern with the season was that it was going a little too light on the fact that as a therapist, Jimmy was being totally unethical, and it felt like, aside from being punched in the face that one time, there weren't any negative consequences of that.
Yeah.
And I feel like this was a reminder, no, as good as it is that he's dealing with his grief in a healthy way, what he was doing was irresponsible, and there are going to be consequences for it.
Yeah, that whole last 5 minutes of the final episode, I was sitting there, I was like, things are going too good right now. And then it immediately gives you anxiety because you're all right, what's about to happen? What's about it? And then I thought, oh, okay, we got to the end and nothing happened.
Right.
And then they started walking up the cliff, and I was like, oh, shit. I know something bad's about to happen.
Right. As soon as they showed her, they have this happy dancing wedding montage, and and he drops the line, you look so much like your mother, and you're like, oh, and then it flashes to them walking up the thing, and I was like, even briefly, because it had that montage where it showed some of his other clients, and they were adjusting, but as soon as it showed Grace and what's his name, the abusive boyfriend, I was like, is she going to actually push him off a cliff?
They had done that, and it was clever how they did that too. They showed the montage, and immediately, as soon as I saw them hiking, I was like, that's about to. And then they cut to the next client who sat on the park bench next to the lady, and I was just like, oh, maybe they're just doing montages, and everything's okay. And then they came back to it, and when they came back to it, I was like, here it goes.
Yep. And then she dropped the mic drop with the boop after she pushes him off. I was like, oh shit.
Yeah. That told me that she was, inside, she's gone through a lot, she knows. And just that little boop, that's the snap, right? That's she went to the bad place. And I'm sure there's going to be some consequences and repercussions for that next year.
There definitely are. And that's one of the things that I loved about the way that this finale ended and the way that the season in general has gone, is it's very mature in how it deals with handling grief and trying to better yourself, because it's not a linear process. Some people were kind of criticizing the roundabout, it feels like one step forward and two steps back, but I feel like that's realistic, honestly. And so it was cool to see that every time it felt like Jimmy or one of the characters overcame something or bettered themselves in some way, there's something else that comes up. And I feel like this was kind of the undercurrent that had been running through the entire season, and it finally came back in a big way.
Yeah, it was, it was funny because just like in life, you don't know what your coworkers or your family members are feeling on a day-to-day basis. And though, Jimmy was feeling good, Alice wasn't, and Jimmy was ready to move on, but Alice wasn't. Or then when Jimmy wasn't ready to move on and he was struggling at the beginning of the season, and Alice was basically left to fend for herself. You know, it's like they were always in different places, and it felt like the last episode, that last scene, they were finally in the same place and they saw eye to eye, and that was great. And then Sean and his role in kind of being, ironically, kind of being the mediator between the two, the bridge to kind of bring those two together unknowingly. When it was at the beginning of the season, you know, Alice, you know, opposed Sean being in the house in the first place,
right?
And Jimmy's trying to help Sean get over his, you know, his fighting addiction, if you want to say. And it was just, man, it was just brilliant.
It is, and it's funny because everything we're talking about makes it sound like it's such a serious show, but it is like kind of a half-hour comedy. That's really funny. Like, I was watching this finale after I wrote my article last night at like 2 a.m. My fiance's asleep in the other room. I'm trying not to laugh out loud, and I'm failing miserably because there are so many. Like every time Harrison Ford talks about raw dogging, I lose it. His misunderstanding of that phrase. It's so funny.
Harrison Ford. I've never seen him in a role like this where he's just kind of. He's kind of sneaky funny,
right?
You know, and he's got these great quips and he's got these great little one-liners, and and then his process with Jimmy and everybody else, it was amazing. I am the biggest Harrison Ford fan now, and it's kind of funny because on the graphic for this show, you made me Harrison Ford, and I sat there and I thought, you know what? That's pretty spot on. I hope I can be like this guy when I'm 80. It's just, and then his own personal dealings, you know what I mean? Like he's dealing with Parkinson's and trying to figure out his daughter and how to bridge the gap between their relationship and all these, again, so many different levels to this that just, it was an inspiring show because it told you, you know, like, hey, nothing's perfect,
right?
You know what I mean? But you can still laugh. You can still laugh through the trauma. And if you have people by your side and you have good people that are supporting you and have your back, then you can get through just about anything, like these characters did.
Yeah, I mean, I love shows they're my favorite that blend comedy and being uplifting with actual hit you in the guts feels every now and then. Like BoJack Horseman was one of my favorites. Leaned a little pessimistic. Ted Lasso, same, leans a little optimistic. This one feels definitely optimistic, but a little closer to the middle, because you like Harrison Ford's fight with his daughter felt like one of the big gut punches of the season in terms of the emotion. But then you fast forward a couple episodes to the finale and he's saying shit like, all the good jobs around here go to whoever can crawl up his ass the farthest. By the way, is Lenny Klein still up there? Say hi for me. Like, I was losing my shit when he dropped that line because he does it in such a like curmudgeonly way, but he leans into it. It's so funny. I
know we're gonna get into all the characters, but like I'm shocked when I have an adverse reaction to an individual and then you make me love them by the end,
right?
Like, that is brilliant writing. And Liz,
yes,
holy shit. I was like, oh, dude, I hate her right off the bat. I was like, dude, I cannot stand this woman. I don't like her whatsoever. By like the 7th episode, I was like, dude, I fucking love Liz.
Yeah, she's fantastic. Like, shout out to, I think her name is Christa Miller, who is the actress who plays her. She took a role that could have been very like grating as kind of the housewife that's discontent and made it something like funny and relatable and just one of the MVPs of the season. When she went in there and yelled at Jimmy like for not getting on Paul's case about the whole Gabby thing, she calls it pussy. Like, it was so funny.
Oh man, that was awesome. The Rock, like the symbolism of the Rock, like, just all of that was awesome. And then my favorite part was at the end when Gabby is looking at Jimmy and she was like, that ain't no safe dick.
She's like, I can hear your vagina humming from here. Oh my God.
That was fantastic.
That was so great. Things you liked about the season in general. I know we've touched on some of these things, but I do want to shout out Jason Segel because for anyone who's watched like How I Met Your Mother or Forgetting Sarah Marshall, he's really kind of perfected the role of like funny but sad man who's relatable. Like he has some, especially when we meet him in the pilot, he's at his lowest. He has some dark tendencies and it's very real in that way. But you ultimately, because of the character's earnestness and their attempts and failures to better themselves, it's so hard not to root for them, even though you know they're not doing the right things a lot of the time.
You know what's so crazy about it is that, like, on the surface, right? If you told me so-and-so got a couple hookers yesterday, so-and-so almost beat the life out of a man, you know, so-and-so has a felony because of, you know, some violence issues and stuff like that. People on the surface will judge those types of people, right? And this broke those barriers. Like, people can redeem themselves. People go through things and they make bad choices, they make bad decisions, sure, in life, but that doesn't mean that they're awful people. Like, and so the redemption qualities of both, well, actually every character on this show is profound. And so with Jimmy and his kind of redemption story a little bit, and Sean, to me, Sean hit the most just because of the whole military factor and the PTSD that he was dealing with, and then the aggression and trying to find an outlet for that aggression in various different ways. And it looks like he's found this cooking shtick that's going to hopefully last into the second season. I think that was great. And so I think that was probably my favorite part of the season, is watching Sean's progression, but also the relationship between the three therapists themselves, you know, Jimmy, Gabby, and then Harrison Ford. What's his character's name? Paul.
Yeah.
I just think that whole dynamic, my favorite scenes were always when those three were in the coffee room.
Yes.
In the break room together, just talking shit. And that was probably my favorite part of the season, was just like watching the character development of every single person, but mainly those three therapists inside that break room was just some of the best material you saw all season.
Yeah, and that kind of alludes to one of the things that stood out, is that this cast, like, on paper, it probably maybe doesn't make as much sense that all of these people's circles continue to collide. Like, they did have to engineer, like, okay, we have a wedding and we have a party and we have a retirement, and all these different things to bring them in the same room. But man, when they did, like, the character dynamics in this show are just off the charts. Like, the chemistry that all of these different characters have, there's so many great little relationships that start to build as the episodes go on. And you know, like I mentioned, the way that it deals with grief and it's not linear. But I also appreciated the way that it kind of, like, its thesis of the season was basically like, a good way to help yourself is to help others.
Yeah,
like Jimmy literally says that in the wedding speech that he nails at the end. And that kind of rings true, especially for me, like, as a very empathetic person. It's really cool to see that kind of play out. And I'm interested to see how they probably challenge that thesis moving forward.
What was your favorite scene in the entire season?
So I feel like my favorite scene was probably back in episode 4, when Jimmy and Liz are shouting at each other across from their decks, because Jimmy just found out that his daughter lost his virginity to Liz's son.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And he's like, it's both dark, but it's also very funny and emotional at the same time. And he's yelling at Liz, like, where's your purpose, Liz? Liz's purpose. I can't find you. You're not here. Like, basically telling her to mind her own business. And it was very, like, I was dying laughing, but it's not supposed to be funny, or maybe it is. I don't know. I felt like it was the perfect merging of, like, funny, but also kind of like, oh, that's a little bit sad.
Yeah. Mine was, I think it was episode 3, where Sean is living at the house, but he's taking out the trash, and Pam, the neighbor, comes down the street, and he's like, I'm just throwing the trash away, and she's like, what are you doing in this neighborhood? And then Liz comes down the street, who you think is the initial Karen, but it's really Pam that's the Karen, right? And she comes out and she's like, go away, Pam, he's not bothering you or whatever. And Derek comes in and was like, hey, Pam. And Liz is like, no, we don't like Pam. And then he turns around and is like, eat a dick, Pam. And he takes off. Like, that whole scene was tremendous. That was my favorite
big ass
scene.
Smile on his face, too. Derek is low-key one of the MVPs of the season, too, because he had some of the best lines, and just his eternal optimism, despite the fact that his wife is basically telling him, like, I can handle you for 2 hours a day, max. That's it.
You have to have thick skin to be married to Liz because of all her little quirks and all her requirements.
Yes.
And Derek is the perfect model for that. I have a feeling, like we talked about before the show, I have a feeling Derek is going to have a moment or two next year where he just snaps.
Like righteous fury at some point. Like,
yeah, where he lays down the law, like, nope, I'm fucking done
enough.
with this. Yep.
Yeah, no, this whole cast was fantastic. Like Michael Urie, who plays Brian, his gay best friend, he just injected joy into like every single scene. Jessica Williams as Gabby was fantastic with her one-liners.
She was awesome.
When she's walking to the interview and she's like, big fat coochie energy. God bless, man.
She was amazing too.
Yeah.
She is a beautiful woman, by the way. Like I was like, oh man, okay.
Good for Jimmy.
Yeah, but yeah, and that whole dynamic, I kind of had a feeling that might happen.
Right.
And then even at the first time they hooked up, you were like, okay, well, where's this really going to go?
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, by the end, you're like, "Oh shit, here we go! Like, this is going to be a thing." So.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because it's funny how it progressed from Safe Dick, which is also this show and its one-liners, man. We got Sad Face, we got Safe Dick, we got Raw Dog, we got Boop, like
big coochie energy,
right? Big coochie energy. Like there were so many clever little lines that they snuck in there, but that will be interesting, and it kind of makes me excited for season 2, which has already been renewed for. Because there are plenty of, not just the cliffhanger, there are plenty of dynamics to still explore because it ends for most of the characters on a happy note. But obviously with Grace pushing her boyfriend off the cliff and that being a direct result of Jimmy's therapy, that'll be something to deal with. The fact that Gabby has feels for Jimmy and Jimmy is probably not ready for a relationship of any kind. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they told Alice when she found out about it that it was just like a one-time thing. Like, how is she going to deal with that when she's still in the process of letting go of her mom? And, you know, that one sad flashback where she realizes she's forgetting what her mom's laugh sounds like. Like, there's a lot to explore there. So I'm very excited for season 2.
Alice's character, out of all the characters, I probably didn't like the most.
Okay.
Just because she played the perfect teenage role,
right?
Like just the swarm of emotions that she was feeling. I have 15-year-olds. I have a 17-year-old. I've seen this firsthand, like how kids can just be dicks sometimes and not really take. The thing about Alice is she never took the time to look at it from her dad's perspective. Right. And I think that's been her major flaw this entire time. And until she does, and I feel like at some point she will, and they will make that pivot where she can kind of see things through her dad's eyes. That's when she's going to hit that maturity level where she doesn't judge people. She doesn't judge her dad specifically over the way he's been dealing with tragedy. And for him wanting to move past the tragedy and move on with life. And she's fighting hard to not let go. And because I think that's how she views it. Like I don't want to let go of my mom. Well, you don't have to let go of your mom. Right. You just, by nature of the circumstance, you're going to forget some things. Yeah. But I thought it was cool that he gave her the boxes for her to be able to touch and feel some semblance of her mom still, which was pretty cool.
Yeah. And I mean, props to Lakita Maxwell because I feel like we've shouted out every member of the cast at this point, but like she does nail the difficult teenager role. And I think it's intentional because, you know, we'd only see like an episode or two of it in terms of the repercussions of Jimmy's bad parenting for that whole year. Like she's basically left to fend for herself for a year without her mother and her dad, you know, bringing hookers home and doing drugs on the dining room or the patio table, like all these terrible things. So we don't get to see the effects of that as much unless they're expressed in that way. But I do think it's sad because she's finally coming to a place of acceptance with her father and a happy place for both of them. And now it's going to be totally blown up by what happened at the end. Favorite character relationship, if you had to pick one.
Favorite character relationship, Harrison Ford and Jimmy.
That's a great one because especially their awkward hug at the
and then he told Liz about it. He's
cool
like,
hugs and tells.
Fantastic.
It's so funny.
Yeah, I love, like I said, Harrison Ford's character was spot on. And I love the fact that Jimmy, who's lost himself and he's trying to find himself, that he finds the most difficult person to try to get affection from. Right. And then at the end, he gets it. It's just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. That's a fantastic dynamic. Gabby and Liz became one of my favorite random pairings of the season. Damn, Derek and anyone, honestly.
Oh my God,
because he's got to be fun to like act scenes with, because he just says every line with the biggest smile on his face. He's just so happy.
It's so funny. He's played that role to a certain degree before on Married with Children, where he was kind of the abused husband, so to speak. You know what I mean? And he's actually had the gamut of different roles that he's played throughout his career. He was actually the villain, if you will, in Revenge of the Nerds. He was the star quarterback.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
you know what I mean? And so like way back in the 80s, and now to see him kind of be a beloved character where he has these witty little quips, and it's just I'm very happy for that guy and his career to be able to get on a show like this and really kind of display the kind of nonsensical husband abuse that a lot of guys go through that same thing, and vice versa. I'm not going to say it's just one way, but I can identify with Derek from time to time.
Oh yeah, well, hopefully not as in terms of the peeing off the balcony part, but
I'm not going to deny that. You know, we don't have a two-story house anymore. If that makes you feel any better.
Before we get to our final score, any complaints or concerns with the season? I think my biggest one was it felt like at times it was kind of glossing over the fact that he was taking a very unethical and unrealistic approach to therapy. Like, I feel like if his boss in real life had found out about what he was doing with his clients, he probably would have been fired. But I do like I said, that they actually made those consequences very real at the end, and it's something that he's going to have to grapple with moving forward. It's not giving him a pass.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would say that was probably the one thing, because they always talk about psychology, and therapists have a way to unlock the mind, if you will, and that's what he did. And in one of these instances, it's going to end up backfiring on him.
Yeah.
And that's a very serious thing. Like, if this thing goes to court, or if the guy ends up dying, we don't know if he survived the fall or not yet, which is going to be out there. But he also got his ass whooped by Sean.
He did,
which was almost a very similar scenario, right? So this guy got it twice,
right,
by the same therapist.
Yeah.
Like, that's going to be hard to overcome.
Yes, it will.
I didn't like that so much, but hey, you got to have some conflict. You got to have some drama in there. Everything can't just be roses all the time. And so I understand it.
Yeah.
I also don't, I would say my biggest takeaway from the season that I wasn't a big fan of, I wish they would have gotten a little bit more into Sean.
Agreed. That was my second note, was his journey kind of got relegated to the sidelines, like during the middle episodes.
Yeah, I thought he was going to play more of a factor than he did. I felt like he was kind of an afterthought towards the end of the season. So I'd like to see them kind of open that up a little bit more, because we still don't really know what is making him tick, to a certain degree. Like, we know he was in the military, we know he was in war, we know he killed some people, but we still don't know, like, what are his triggers? Why are these happening? And I'm sure we're going to find that out next year too. Right.
And that's the thing, is because when we meet him early on, he has these triggers. He wants to fight everybody. And he, we learn a little bit about his family and how difficult that relationship has become because of what's happened since he left the military. But we never really see the work that's put in to get him from point A to point B, where he feels like one of the healthier characters by the season's end. He's starting his own business. And we can assume, like every other character in the show, there will be regressions, there will be steps backward. So I hope that they explore a little bit more of that, because it did feel like they kind of yada his actual growth process.
Also, give me 45-minute episodes, not 30.
I'm down for it.
Dude, like Ted Lasso's 40 minutes. Like, give me 40 minutes. Like, every time I get like, I like sink my teeth into it, I'm like really into it. The episode ends, I'm like, what the hell? Let's go. 40-minute episodes, Apple. Let's go.
Yep. It's part of its charm, and also just it's grating when you don't get that final like 10 minutes that you wanted. Final score out of 10 for season 1.
For me, I'm probably going to go 9.75 out of 10.
Okay. Very nice.
Because I think, this is about as perfect a show as I could ask for. I'm not into the heavy comedies where it's just like a bunch of slaps and laughs, and it's just like, well, okay, whatever. Like, Community is good, and The Office is good, and stuff like that. But I feel like you need a little drama mixed in there, and it wasn't like it wasn't anxious drama. Like, I didn't feel like my nerves were all over the place. And I think, like Jim Valvano said, if every day you can laugh, you can cry, then you've had a full day. You've had a really good day. And each one of these episodes, at some point, you can feel the emotions kind of all over the place. You laugh, sometimes you cry in some of these episodes, and it's just fantastic. And I love those kind of shows.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a 9 out of 10. And that is even taking into fact that like before the finale, I think I was at like an 8.5 because of my concerns about glossing over the repercussions of his therapy. But like the way that they addressed it, the fact that they're not afraid to lean into dramatic, heavy, real stuff, but also ultimately find a way for the show's message and characters to still be uplifting, like that's a really hard tightrope to walk, and they do it really well, especially for a show in its first season that only had 10 half-hour episodes to do it. So I can't, I mean, I've said this a couple of times, but I can't remember a show whose first season impressed me this much in a while in this category. But any final thoughts before we get out of here?
No, man, I'm just really anxious. I'm glad. I'm kind of glad that Ted Lasso picked up basically where Shrinking is leaving off.
Yeah.
Like, so those two kind of, they overlapped by just a couple episodes. So I have something to watch every week now. But once Ted Lasso is done, then I'm going to be like very depressed because I have another like probably 6 months to go before Shrinking comes back.
Yeah.
So I'm excited. I again, like you, it took me like an episode or two to get into Ted Lasso. I was hooked from episode 1 on Shrinking, and that very rarely happens. It's one of my favorite shows of all time.
Absolutely. And hopefully, because this might be Ted Lasso's final season, Shrinking will be able to kind of pick up the torch as far as Apple's like feel-good comedy of the week. But that's going to do it for us here. You can follow Saul at Saul_Bookman. You can follow me at Gerald Bourget. And until next time, keep it G-rated.